Well, are you sure it didn't happen before? You have no basis to ask that.
Her recollection is horrible.
No, it's not.
Some letters that were sent to
Blake Lively's shiny new lawyer just walked into court and unknowingly lit the match that could burn down her entire defense. And yes, it's as tragic as it sounds. In the chaos of switching legal teams mid-scandal, someone forgot to mention which files not to bring into open court. So there he was, thinking he was delivering justice, when in fact he handed the judge a live grenade. The session was supposed to be a routine pre-trial meeting to clarify procedural motions. Instead, it marked the first visible crack in what now looks like an unraveling legal strategy. Mid-discussion, Blake's lead attorney, David Michael Gotadal, abruptly stood up, packed his briefcase, and walked out. No explanation was given in the moment. But later, court insiders confirmed that Gotadal submitted a document citing irreconcilable ethical conflicts before his quiet exit. He never returned. The trial didn't stop. By the next morning, a new face appeared at the defense table, a secondary attorney from the same firm, one who had reportedly worked under Gotadal. Though qualified, it was immediately obvious that this new lawyer wasn't fully briefed. Still, he pressed on. After a quick introduction, he attempted to continue the defense's original argument until he made a disastrous misstep. Trying to stabilize the narrative, the new attorney referenced a known, disgraced legal figure as a benchmark for ethical standards. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. It was the last thing anyone expected, and exactly the wrong move during an already fragile defense. What should have been a procedural formality has now become a turning point. Blake's camp isn't just scrambling, they're imploding.
Kind of created this new Me Too law, and they wanted Judge Lehman to use it in Blake Lively's case, which is basically saying that if you are suing someone for SH, they're not allowed to sue.
While addressing Judge Lehman, the new attorney referenced a set of letters submitted in support of Blake's case, urging the court to consider the so-called New Me Too law, a controversial doctrine arguing that individuals alleging sexual harassment should not face defamation countersuits. He asked the judge to formally weigh the collective support reflected in these letters, calling them essential to understanding the broader cultural climate surrounding victim advocacy.
Times did a big story on this, and they also mentioned the letter that was sent from an individual, a lawyer. Her name is Elise Dorsey, and LA Times was saying that a separate letter of interest was also filed by Elise Dorsey, a former federal employee.
He stressed that the court had received letters from legal scholars, advocacy groups, and prominent survivors of workplace harassment. It all sounded carefully scripted and might have worked until one name was mentioned. In that instant, a single letter turned the courtroom against the entire defense.
Survivor who described being sued for defamation after speaking out and said the law at issue could have spared her years-long legal or.
The moment the defense cited a letter from Ely Dorsey, the atmosphere in the courtroom shifted. Valden's legal counsel immediately raised a sharp objection. Your Honor, are we to understand that the defense is relying on the testimonial of Miss Elise Dorsey? Judge Lehman, clearly puzzled, asked the new attorney to clarify. The lawyer confirmed, stating Dorsey's letter offered lived experience relevant to the case. But Judge Lehman wasn't buying it. Why, he asked pointedly, would a case built on credibility lean so heavily on a woman whose own claims were publicly discredited and legally dismissed?
He's claiming the relationship was consensual, and he was showing a lot of text. There's a lot of text messages in the legal filings as well, where you can see their text back and forth.
Elise Dorsey, a former federal employee, is no stranger to controversy or headlines. Her own legal battle, once hailed as a landmark Me Too case, famously collapsed under scrutiny. What began as a public reckoning ended in humiliation when court documents revealed she had engaged in an 11-year consensual affair with a married professor. That same relationship, one she later recharacterized as harassment, became the foundation of her now discredited claims. When the professor countersued for defamation, Dorsey quietly settled the case and paid damages. That outcome is not rumor, it's public record. It's precedent. And that's who Blake Lively's defense chose to spotlight in front of a federal judge. It's one thing to present a shaky defense. It's another to hand the court the blueprint for why it should fall apart. Judge Lehman didn't miss a beat. He questioned whether the defense had properly vetted the authors of the letters they submitted as evidence, letters meant to bolster Blake's credibility and paint her as a symbol of victim advocacy. The new attorney, visibly rattled, fumbled through vague references to external contributors and peer-reviewed submissions. But the damage was done. By invoking a figure whose legal integrity had already been stripped away, the defense unintentionally undermined its entire argument, especially their plea to shield Blake from defamation countersuits under the pretense of victim protection. The irony was brutal. In trying to protect Blake under the banner of survivor advocacy, they instead dragged her into the shadow of one of the movement's most controversial figures. The courtroom was already on edge following the previous day's chaos, when Blake's lead attorney, David Michael Gotadal, abruptly walked out mid-session. His quiet but pointed exit, citing irreconcilable ethical conflicts, left a vacuum that had yet to be filled. Now, with the replacement lawyer struggling to maintain composure, things were spiraling even faster. Attempting to salvage momentum, the new attorney reached for what he clearly thought would be a moral anchor, a stack of letters sent to Judge Lehman by advocacy groups and legal scholars. With forced confidence, he highlighted one letter in particular, one that promoted the so-called New Me Too law, a controversial and still unofficial legal theory arguing that victims of sexual harassment should not be vulnerable to defamation countersuits, regardless of whether their claims are proven in court. But the issue wasn't just the theory. It was the person behind it, that letter, the one the defense so proudly offered as a cornerstone of their argument, was authored by none other than Elise Dorsey. The moment her name was spoken aloud, the atmosphere in the courtroom shifted. Murmurs swept through the gallery like a warning. Sensing an opening, opposing counsel from Justin Valden's team rose and asked a single, devastating question. Is the defense asking this court to consider the opinion of Elise Dorsey, whose case was publicly discredited and settled against her? Judge Lehman paused, clearly caught off guard. Turning to the defense, he asked for clarification. The new attorney nodded, asserting that Dorsey's voice represented the lived experiences of many victims. But it was a miscalculation. A fatal one, because Dorsey isn't just controversial, she's a cautionary tale. Once positioned as a brave whistleblower exposing systemic harassment, Dorsey had filed claims against a professor she'd been romantically involved with for more than a decade. What wasn't initially disclosed, but later surfaced through court documents and investigative reports, was that the relationship had been entirely consensual. Both parties had been married to other people at the time. It was only after the professor ended things that Dorsey filed harassment allegations. Not only did she fail to prove her claims, but she was forced to settle a defamation countersuit and pay damages. That's the person Blake's team chose to elevate. How does a defense collapse? Sometimes, it's not with a single lie, but with the loudest, least credible voice in the room. Judge Lehman's tone changed. His questions became more pointed. He asked directly whether Blake's legal team had reviewed the details of Dorsey's case before presenting her letter as part of their evidentiary package. The attorney deflected, suggesting the letter was symbolic of a larger cultural moment, representative of the struggles many victims face, regardless of technical legal outcomes. But the argument didn't land. You could feel the energy shift in the room. If this was the best evidence Blake's team had, a failed advocate backing a doctrine with no legal standing, then what else in their defense was built on sand? It was a dangerous question, and you could see it land on the judge's shoulders. Because once a federal judge begins to suspect that you're playing fast and loose with legal truth, the benefit of the doubt doesn't erode. It disappears instantly.
Okay, so this YouTube channel called Cassidy O'Connell looked into the legal case from Elise Dorsey.
But the damage wasn't done yet. The mistakenly submitted file didn't just include Dorsey's letter. It also contained a full exposé by independent journalist Cassidy O'Connell. Her investigation, already viral for its scathing takedown of Dorsey's claims, laid out court documents, text messages, and timelines in brutal, undeniable detail.
It's crazy. So this woman had a relationship to this professor for 11 years while she was also married. He was married and she was also.
O'Connell had uncovered a trove of messages that directly contradicted Dorsey's claims. Flirtatious texts sent during the exact period she later described as harassment painted a drastically different picture, one of obsession, not victimhood. The messages were emotional, jealous, and at times threatening. In one particularly chilling line, Dorsey allegedly wrote, "If you think you can just walk away from me, you're wrong." And yet this was the voice Blake's legal team had chosen to elevate as part of their moral foundation. It was a catastrophic misstep. What kind of defense builds its credibility on a figure whose entire narrative had already been dismantled? Publicly and legally, Judge Lehman methodically reviewed the material, quietly scanning the screenshots from O'Connell's investigation. Then, in a moment that stunned the room, he read aloud one of the most damning excerpts. She continued to show up at his workplace uninvited and emotional, demanding reconciliation and threatening exposure. The courtroom fell into an uneasy silence. No one from Blake's team objected. No one offered a correction. There was only a hollow attempt to pivot back to the principle of advocacy, as the attorney phrased it. But by then, the strategy had already collapsed. The court saw through it.
See their texts back and forth. And after 11 years, when he actually wanted to end the relationship, she was not happy about it and she got jealous.
Then came the moment no one could spin. Elise Dorsey had lost her case and paid damages to close it. That fact, read aloud in federal court, instantly dismantled any illusion that her letter carried the weight of judicial credibility. It didn't. It was damage control, not advocacy. The so-called new Me Too law, meant to protect voices like Dorsey's, now appeared less like a progressive legal safeguard and more like a manufactured loophole for those who lost in court but still wanted to shape public perception. Judge Lehman didn't mince words. Do you expect this court to accept a legal theory constructed by someone who is held accountable for lying under oath? He asked. No one responded. That silence spoke volumes.
Showing up at his campus and yelling at him. So after 11 years of a consensual relationship, she sued him for SH. And then he ended up suing her back for defamation. The lawsuit ended up being settled and she had to pay.
The moment Judge Lehman read the line aloud, the air in the courtroom shifted. Not from a shouted objection or dramatic outburst, but from something quieter, more lethal. A leaked letter, previously submitted in error, wasn't just an awkward procedural misstep. It was the entry point to something far more destructive. Because attached to that file was a fully documented exposé compiled by independent journalist Cassidy O'Connell. And unlike most tabloid speculation, O'Connell's work came with receipts, text messages, timelines, sworn court statements, all laid out in brutal, clinical detail. Her investigation had already gone viral days earlier for dismantling Elise Dorsey's allegations piece by piece. Now, it was federal evidence. The court wasn't just seeing headlines. It was seeing hard proof. O'Connell's investigation unearthed a trove of flirtatious texts Dorsey had sent to the professor she later accused of harassment. They weren't ambiguous. They were explicit, romantic, obsessive. At one point, Dorsey even threatened him. If you think you can just walk away from me, you're wrong. This was the foundation Blake Lively's defense had chosen to stand on, a supposed victim whose claims had already unraveled in the court of public opinion and, eventually, in court itself. The judge read excerpts from those messages aloud. The room was still. Screenshots printed directly from O'Connell's findings told a chilling story. A woman who repeatedly showed up at the man's workplace, emotionally charged, demanding reconciliation and threatening exposure when refused. No one from Blake's legal team interrupted. There were no objections, no clarifications, just the quiet hum of a defense strategy collapsing under its own weight. And that collapse wasn't theoretical. It was judicial. Then came the blow no one could spin. Elise Dorsey had lost her case. Not only that, she had paid to close it. That fact, read into the federal record, shattered any illusion that her advocacy letter had come from a place of integrity or legal validation. It hadn't. It came from panic, damage control, an attempt to repurpose personal failure into a broader movement. The courtroom wasn't buying it. Judge Lehman didn't mince words. Do you expect this court to accept a legal theory constructed by someone who is held accountable for lying under oath? The silence that followed was deafening. Not even Blake's newly appointed attorney dared respond. And in that moment, it became obvious. The court no longer saw this as a matter of principle. It saw it as theater, but the performance wasn't over yet. Judge Lehman pivoted next to the origin of the letter submissions. Who vetted these letters? Who selected which ones would be included in the defense's moral argument? Was Blake Lively herself aware of the backgrounds of these so-called advocates? The answers were vague. Too vague. And in federal court, vague doesn't signal discretion. It signals concealment. Lehman closed the discussion with a quiet but stunning announcement. The court would be reconsidering the admissibility of advocacy letters tied to disputed legal outcomes. A statement that stunned even the prosecution. If those letters were stricken from the record, Blake's entire moral defense, the narrative she'd painstakingly built, would vanish with them. And just when it seemed the defense couldn't fumble the case any harder, the courtroom was handed a fresh scandal. This one came not from a cross-examination, but from the leaked folder itself, the same folder Blake's legal team had accidentally submitted. Among its chaotic contents was an unassuming PDF. It wasn't legal testimony or evidence from the current case. It was a compilation of Reddit threads. Archived, time-stamped, and damning. The document chronicled months of Elise Dorsey's online activity, an orchestrated campaign to sanitize her digital footprint. According to the files, Dorsey had been systematically deleting critical comments from her LinkedIn, flagging mentions of her legal loss, and scrubbing any reference to her failed lawsuit from public-facing platforms. But internet users had noticed. Anonymous legal hobbyists, quickly dubbed Reddit detectives by the courtroom, had tracked the deletions, captured before and after screenshots, and began compiling them in real time. They hadn't meant to hand their findings over to a federal judge, but thanks to one careless attorney, that's exactly what happened, and the optics couldn't have been worse. Entire threads gone. Fair questions erased. Why continue flirtatious contact with someone you accuse of harassment? Why are settlement terms hidden? Why build a social campaign on a case you lost? Deleted. One by one. And the court now had proof. Judge Lehman read aloud from the online comments. This appears to be a pattern of narrative manipulation, he said, voice level but cold. Is the defense aware that the individual you've cited as a moral authority is simultaneously scrubbing public records of her legal loss? The courtroom froze. No one had a good answer. The new lawyer muttered something about irrelevant personal activity, but the damage had already spread like a crack through glass, because this wasn't about Elise Dorsey anymore. It was about the defense's willingness to elevate her, and suddenly, attention shifted sharply to Blake Lively herself. Someone from Baldoni's legal team stood and pointed out what many in the courtroom had already begun to think. The manipulation tactics used by Dorsey bore an eerie resemblance to Blake's own public behavior. The court had already seen footage from June 2020, Blake attending a forecast dinner in full paparazzi glam while her co-star, director Justin Baldoni, was conspicuously absent. Media coverage painted the dinner as a warm post-rap celebration. But now, seen in context, it was something far colder. Calculated. Staged. A narrative ambush, just like Dorsey's. Judge Lehman spoke slowly. There appears to be an effort to manipulate not only the narrative of this case, but the people shaping it. The words hit like a gavel to the chest. The media gallery, which had sat mostly quiet, erupted into soft whispers. Social media lit up before the courtroom even recessed. Hashtags trended in real time, and just when it seemed it couldn't spiral any further, it did. Another file from the same leaked bundle revealed something more damning than Reddit threads. It was a contract. A scanned excerpt from a legal agreement between Blake Lively's law firm, Wilkie Farnan Gallagher, and the Trump administration. Not just an advisory deal. A $100 million commitment to provide extensive legal support, and buried in the fine print, a clause agreeing to suspend diversity-based hiring practices as part of the contract's restructuring terms. It was a slap in the face to everything Blake Lively claimed to stand for. This was a woman who routinely spoke out on LGBTQ+ rights, racial equity, and reproductive justice, who posted support for marginalized communities, who had spoken at marches. And now her law firm, the very firm representing her in this case, had quietly allied itself with a political apparatus actively undermining those platforms. You didn't need to be a legal analyst to see the hypocrisy. And the judge? He didn't wait. He read from the contract aloud, pausing only to lift an eyebrow in Blake's direction. This agreement, he said, appears to contradict the public image your client has gone to great lengths to cultivate. Blake didn't flinch, but she didn't fight either. She looked down, hands folded, jaw tight. The moment wasn't just damning, it was defining. Outside the courthouse, backlash came fast. Activist accounts tweeted with fury. One read, "So Blake Lively claims to fight for justice while her legal team dismantles inclusion for a $100 million check." Another editor wrote bluntly, "Her credibility just hit structural collapse." And this collapse wasn't unfolding in whispers. It was happening in front of cameras, judges, reporters, and the public. Inside, the judge's patience was wearing thin. "There's a difference between being misunderstood and being misrepresented," he said. "This court will be examining both." It wasn't just a warning. It was a seismic shift. Every piece of Blake's carefully engineered brand, from her red carpet statements to her social media activism, was now fair game. The court wasn't just analyzing facts. It was analyzing character, and that scrutiny wasn't finished. Another file emerged. Surveillance-style photographs from June 28, 2024. Originally buried deep in the bundle of accidental submissions. They showed Blake arriving at a private cast dinner, hair styled, makeup pristine, paparazzi already in place. The event was promoted as a celebration of the production wrap. The article that followed painted her as gracious, radiant, supportive. There was just one problem. Justin Baldoni, the director and co-lead, wasn't there, not by accident. By design. Because when every cast member is invited except one, and photographers are stationed outside an hour early, it's not dinner. It's a setup, Judge Lehman said so himself. This appears to have been a staged media opportunity executed with the clear knowledge of who would be present and who would not. It wasn't a question. It was an accusation. The courtroom watched as footage from the dinner rolled. Photographers called out cast names, but never mentioned Baldoni once. They weren't confused. They were instructed. The prosecution stepped in fast. Baldoni's counsel called the dinner a calculated PR campaign, a way to rewrite set dynamics and erase his influence. This wasn't about unity, they said. It was about erasure. And the final nail? The defense's explanation for why these media files were submitted at all. Buried among advocacy letters. Attached to unrelated exhibits. No context. No transparency. Judge Lehman didn't buy it. He leaned forward. Was the original legal team aware these materials would be discovered? No answer. Just a defense attorney flailing in front of a judge who now suspected more than negligence. He suspected strategy, manipulation, possibly even contempt. And when a federal judge begins discussing contempt, not casually but repeatedly, it signals something irreversible. Blake Lively was no longer defending her reputation. She was now defending her tactics, her team, her very credibility. And if the last year taught the public anything, it's that there's nothing harder to salvage than a celebrity built on moral clarity. Once that clarity collapses, because when the footnotes reveal a different story than the headlines, the truth doesn't just slip out. It erupts, and it never goes back in the file.